Hello, everyone. So, welcome to today's Intuitive XR chat, where we have a very interesting guest today with Dr. Michael Wiesing. And before we start, let's check. Hello, yeah, there are quite a few new viewers here. I'm happy to have you there, and I look forward to the chat. And I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are actively monitoring the chat, and we look forward to your questions and interruptions. It's supposed to be an interactive element. And what you will also see today is a guided tour through the event lab in Barcelona, which is a very, very nice opportunity for you to see the really interesting and famous virtual reality lab in Barcelona. But yeah, without further ado, our guest, Dr. Michael Wiesing, has a PhD where he worked mostly on methodological investigations and timing issues using virtual reality engine, and now is a postdoctoral researcher in the event lab in Barcelona, where he's working in the lab of Mel Slater. And for those who are familiar with the name, they will now know exactly what it's about. And for those who don't know the name, Mel is a very famous researcher and quite a renowned name in the VR space. Very early on already worked with virtual reality, and it's a great pleasure today to have Michael here in our chat.
Thanks for the introduction. Okay, so shall I start talk a bit about me or?
Yeah, let's maybe start with your transition. So you've done a PhD in Germany. You are from Germany, and now you are in Mel Slater's lab with working with ethics. And I'm kind of curious how that happened and what exactly you are now working with or on.
Okay, so maybe a quick rundown, and we can maybe about some points talk later more in detail. But so first of all, I'm a car mechanic actually. Uh, but that's almost
I
20
did
years
not
ago
know.
that I finished my training. So don't ask me to repair your car. Ask someone who has knowledge about that. Uh, and after my training, I did my Abitur, so I went back to school. Before I was more the underachiever in school, so just passed through school and that's it. But then went back to school, made my Abitur, and decided to study biology. But already with a focus to do neuroscience actually. I actually wanted in Cologne to study this neuroscience bachelor, which was quite new at that time, but it's also, or at that time it was quite small. Per year there were 15 students or so, and I didn't have the grades for that. So it was biology, which was close enough and then good enough to make for the master, then the transition to the neuroscience master in Cologne. And then I made my master, and from there or during that time I already worked at the research center in Jülich at the Institute for Neuroscience and Medicine, or in particular a sub-institute of that, the Institute for Cognitive Neuroscience by Professor Gerion Fink. And worked mainly on attentional processes or also on visual perception, on spatial perception. Like I work with a Müller-Lühr illusion that often people know was sort of two lines which have the same length and then draw some arrows to the ends and in one version pointing outwards or inwards and then they look differently as if they would have a different length. Yeah, and then I also, after my master, I made my PhD there. And originally, the PhD idea had nothing to do with VR. This was in the end of 2015, and I had quite actually freedom to choose what I want to do. I was not paid by a specific project, but by just money from the institute. And since I was working there for quite a while, I had a bit of my fool's license. Can I say that in English? I don't know. But yeah, I had quite some freedom what I could do, and I wanted to do VR at that time already. A few months before I started to think about the topic, I tried the DK2, the development kit 2 from Oculus. A friend bought it, And one day he called me and said, "Hey, come over. I need to show you something." And I was hooked from the first moment. And also from the first moment, I thought, wow, we could use it for science. So for neuroscience, we can create so much kind of stimuli. Um, I wouldn't say that I had an idea at that time was specifically to do with it. But I kind of thought immediately, okay, this is something we need to do use for science. Um, but in the end, I hesitated and decided against doing something with VR. As I said, it was in the end of 2015, and there were no consumer headsets out there. So the best for me was at that time also to get some used DK2 from eBay. And this was all too insecure. And then it was also not a VR institute. I was a bit on my own with that topic, so I decided against it. But yeah, it was always during when I started my PhD, I was always still wanted to work with VR. And about a bit more than a year into my PhD, I decided to switch a bit. So there was the first project for my PhD has nothing to do with VR actually. But from then on, I switched, and here, this is, I think what you're also quite interested in is we asked ourselves, okay, we have VR systems, they are cheap. I tried a bit to test, can I create virtual environments with Unity and so on, that worked. But we asked ourselves, can we really use it for science? I mean, these are gaming devices. This is Quest, Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, they are all made and sold mainly for gaming. This is one of the bigger markets for it. And the same is true for the software. Like experiments are created in Unreal Engine or in Unity, which are softwares optimized and designed to create games and not experiments. And when you compare this with what we actually otherwise use in the lab for more conventional experiments or stimuli on a computer screen, they're usually in 2D, simple stimuli, and we have specific toolboxes for it. Like one is called presentation, another famous one is PsychoPy. Um, and these softwares are really optimized to be to have the standards that we need. And one specific uh, feature that we need for a lot of experiments is to measure time or to measure when things happen. So, like when you work with an EEG and you want to know what happens in the brain when the participant sees a specific stimulus, and you need to really synchronize basically your stimulus with your brain activity. Um, And these standard tools like CyclePy and Presentation, they are optimized to do this. But uh, game engines don't work like that. And it was already clear when we started with this that we wouldn't be able to really measure something like a stimulus event in a millisecond precision. So really, we can say plus minus 1 millisecond uh, that we know when it happened. Um, and for example, one problem is in a game engine, you have a certain frame rate and it doesn't make sense to make calculations or to check for input more often than you present frames. This is basically the time rate with what your calculations are done. Which also means when you have a higher frame rate, your data gets better. You can measure time more accurate because you can more often look was, for example, a button pressed. Um, yeah, but for us, the idea or the question was a bit in the beginning, what can we do with it? So can we use it for science? And also the question, can we, am I really capable of creating usable virtual environments? I had some basic tests in Unity, but yeah, this was a squared room and you could turn your head. This was all. Um, but of course for VR you need more interactions. This is all a little bit more complex than just looking around. So in the beginning, it was really that we approached like, what can we do with it? And the project that I then did the idea was then to retest this experiment that I did at first, which had nothing to do with VR. It was a simple reaction time experiment. There was some Gabor patches on a computer screen, and you had to press a button from time to time. But we wanted to originally to make a more ecologically valid version of this experiment. So ecological validity describes a bit how close is an experiment to our everyday life. So and for the majority of experiments, this is not really close. I mean, there's reasons for this. We for experiments, it has huge advantage when we can uh, simplify things because we can control it more easily. Like you want to test how attention is distributed or how we allocate attention to things. Doing this on a computer screen where you show a few dots, or doing this in a street with lots of people is not the same. So it's on a computer screen you can control it, but on the other hand, it's extremely simplified and does not reflect reality. And here is a bit the idea that VR can be used for that, because we can, in a computer, create an environment that looks however we want it to look, and only things happen that we want to happen. And we can control every detail. Um, and here the idea is, and this is actually quite old idea, was already in the 90s, where people, where VR was, it was short hype, but it was never really a thing. But people already said, hey, we can use this to increase, to make our experiments closer to real life. Um, I drink a bit. But this was the goal in the end, to do an experiment of this first task that I did, but an ecologically valid idea was a bit to make a game with dice. For the one or the other reason, it never happened that this experiment was done, because we wanted first to do two other experiments which were thought to be one study initially. And the one aspect of the study was supposed to be to test, first of all, when we want to measure reaction times, how precise are they? So, like when I press a button after 300 milliseconds, what does the engine or the results in there tell me? Um, and the other question was um, related to that, when we experience virtual reality, this is something, it feels real, things kind of look more or less real, but there are lots of imperfections, lots of things which are different. Like one thing is, for example, you have a smaller field of view than your visual field, which has a result that you have to make more head rotations compared to eye movements, eye rotations. So this uh, interplay between your eyes and your head to look around is a different one, because it doesn't make sense to just rotate your eyes to the one extreme or the other, because there's no display anymore. So people behave differently in VR. It's also, in VR, distances look smaller. When you ask people, participants, how far is something away, they estimate it to be closer to themselves in VR than in an equivalent real-world situation, which has probably much to do with the displays and the fact that while the world looks as if it has depth, we just look on a flat screen. And in the real world, we need to focus our eyes like a camera, to focus on specific distances to get a sharp image. And this is called accommodation, and this is coupled to a process called convergence, which is how the eyes are oriented to each other. Like when I move my finger like that, then I exaggerate a bit, but then they move a bit closer to each other. And these two processes are coupled to each other in the real world. Um, but in VR, you still need to do this, but you don't need to accommodate, you don't need to focus anymore, because the display is always at a fixed distance. Um, this is probably one of the reasons why things look smaller in VR, although there are other aspects also discussed, like reduced cues, spatial cues, because of simplified environments, usually not as complex, as detailed as reality. Um, However, to come back to my what I wanted to say, for my project and the idea. So we asked ourselves, okay, when we do such a standard experiment, an ordinary reaction time experiment in VR, where we study some visual processes, in particular, this was about expectancies and about features of objects, like the color of an object. So there's always, you see one trial after the other, a red object, and suddenly it's green. There's nothing to do with your task, but it affects how you behave. So this was a bit what we studied. And we asked ourselves, do people behave the same when they do exactly the same experiment, just it's in VR? Um, and this were these and this were the questions, so the reaction time question and this question, do they behave, that I wanted to test in one study. I wanted to first look how do I get the reaction times precise enough, and then basically use this replication in VR as a first test with human participants of using this reaction time method. Yeah, but in the end, also due to some health-related issues and other delays, in the end it was that we split these two studies into two individual studies, also because both studies grew, were bigger and more complex than I initially planned, and the last study never happened. Uh, okay, and I'll talk a lot, maybe.
No, I love it.
I'll let you talk
It's
for a
such a
moment.
yeah. No, it's really great. You make basically a complete introduction to experimentation and what to use virtual reality for. That's it's fantastic. I mean, we know each other for a few years now, and I think we've met on Twitter even
Yeah.
before we've met through Lewis for the neuroeconomics conference. And I think we instantly clicked even on Twitter because we were both so interested in these normally super boring topics. Like
Mhm.
you were so interested in the timings, and I was instantly hooked because it's so irrelevant to what I'm doing, and or what I was doing at the time, and yeah, still am doing.
Do
And
you remember when we met on Twitter, on Reddit?
on Reddit,
Yeah,
I do
I
not.
don't have this account anymore, so you don't bother to, or maybe it exists anymore, but I have changed my Reddit account from time to time.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I had an account for a while that also was called NeuroVR or
Yeah.
VR_neuroscience, and
Uh-huh.
suddenly there was a Kanga on Reddit asking me, "Hey, what kind of research are you doing?" And I then said, "Yeah, a bit like this and that, but here's a link to my Twitter. There's a bit more information."
Oh no, I did not. I do not remember that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Two nerds found each other. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, and I mean these topics obviously lay the foundation for any kind of research. Yeah, that's just the way that I've mostly dealt with very narrow details in the electrophysiological analysis of EEG, like with different filters and what impact they have and stuff like that. And that's really what plenty of people can now use to improve their research. So that was quite fulfilling, and it's weird to be so interested in that. I think I don't know why I am so interested in it, or you are, but it's great to hear it. And as you said, like
But
this
is it really more weird than being interested in how the one football team plays against the other? How 22 people chase the same ball? I mean, I don't want to offend any football fans. It's totally fine, but I mean, a lot of hobbies are weird when you're not into this and have no background or knowledge about this.
I think
But yeah, it's
society
definitely a
has an
weird
opinion
topic.
on that, but I deny any comment. Yeah. So no, but it's really cool. Also, the way that you described the whole experimental setup and what we can use it for and so on. That's that exact argument that you make in favor of more ecological validity. That is also, I mean, the core argument for mobile brain body imaging that we keep reiterating. And truth be told, we kind of just stated, and we don't really have any proof that VR is more ecologically valid, because it seems trivial. But on the other hand, that would be another thing that someone could be very interested in the question of like how ecologically valid is VR in the end, and how much difference does it make if you are using abstract shapes versus more photogrammetry, like 3D, like high detailed shapes, these kind of things. So also an interesting question for the next a few nerd PhD students.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely need more research really comparing how good can we compare results from VR with normal computer screens. I
Yeah,
mean, I have tested one paradigm. This is there are so many cognitive processes or tests you can do, and as I said, in certain things like distance perception, you will get different results. It's getting better with newer headsets, but it's still a problem for all of them. But in a lot of cases, we do not really understand. And then there is research published done with conventional methods, and other people publish research done with VR, and maybe they come to different conclusions in the end. And but just because maybe they are not really comparable, but maybe because we do not really understand what makes a difference here and why we get a different result. And I think poses really validity problems in the end when we yeah, do not really know or do not really understand what's the difference between those media.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a relatively big gap. We wanted to have, I remember, we wanted to investigate separately the physical rotation and the computer, like virtual rotation on the spot, just like rotation, very simple. And we wanted to do that with flat screen and VR. And the initial idea was to do that in a 2x2 design.
Mm,
So either having physical rotation or virtual rotation using a joystick, and either having that in the VR or in a flat screen, or like for a flat screen. I think I'm not sure what the idea was between flat screen and physical rotation. I think that wouldn't have worked. But the idea was to have a several step build up of the ecological validity or of the changes. And
mm.
we could not finish the first experiment where the idea was to have people in VR using just joystick rotation.
And why couldn't finish it because I got sick or
Yeah,
okay.
like no chance. After 1 minute, everyone aborted.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can imagine. This
Yeah.
is
So in the end, we resorted to just using joystick on flat screen and
mm,
VR with physical rotation. So we couldn't really do the transition in the proper way, but just because I mean, even if we had people who power through that experiment or for some reason don't get sick, then we would have an extreme outlier population, right?
mm.
Because almost everyone got sick, and then those few people who don't get sick, we don't know why they wouldn't get sick, and then that would be a huge outlier, and we can't draw any conclusions from that.
Uh, how do you have problems with motion sickness?
Not anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, this is also for me. I think I can do anything, and it would get me sick. It's really ages ago that I mean in yeah, about 2015, 16 when I had my first VR experience, and also, especially when I think there was Oculus Share was this platform for indie developers to share their apps, and there was a lot of nice things, but there was one Back to the Future experience where you could drive around in a DeLorean in the 1955 Hill Valley, but at some point there was a glitch with the physics and the car just started to fly like a spaceship and always turning around itself.
Oh
And
no.
I thought it would be a good idea to stand through this. It felt really bad, but I made some mistakes that I thought, yeah, I can stand through it. And this is really something I learned. When you start to get sick, stop.
Yeah.
Don't go further. It doesn't get better.
No.
It was the whole evening that I really felt bad.
Yeah. This is also, I remember a few instances in the beginning when we still I had no VR at home, and then I played in the lab, and yeah, definitely there were some bad evenings afterwards. But it's really interesting. This whole the whole field of motion sickness is interesting in and of itself, right? To investigate
Mm.
that. But for me nowadays, it's no problem anymore. I used natural locomotion in the beginning a lot. Do you know that?
I know it. I never used it,
Yeah.
but I know this into the concept.
Yeah. For the audience, natural locomotion is an arm swinger third-party app that you can use for Steam. You can swing your arms, and while you do that, then that moves your character in VR, and it kind of tricks your brain into having more control and being more in, like, believing more that you are the one doing the motion. And but nowadays it's fine doing just with the joystick. I think the first game where I needed to use smooth locomotion and did not teleport actually was Skyrim.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
Skyrim is so large, yeah, you don't want to teleport there. It breaks immersion all the time,
Mm.
and that's why I use natural locomotion. And then the first game where I started to really go like work with the just straight up controller based thumbstick based movement was Contractors VR shooter.
Contractors,
Yeah,
okay.
because there, yeah, you can't do a shooter if you have like so
Mm,
imprecise movements
yeah.
with your arm
Uh,
swinging.
I mean, you mean with your arms? I thought we're thinking about teleportation, but true,
No,
they have
that
don't
doesn't
have
go in. Yeah.
teleportation. Right? Yeah, and then the game would needs to be optimized. It's like Rec Room. They have this paintball with teleportation, but then
Yeah.
everyone needs to use it. You cannot use smooth locomotion, then it's fair.
Yeah. That's a different story then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, we are digressing a lot. Sorry, but maybe now's a good time if you want to show the lab around. That
Okay. Yeah.
would be kind of nice fit, I think.
Yeah. And I just thought, I mean, if you want to talk later about motion sickness, we just have a paper in under review about
Oh,
it.
I mean, if it's under review, then maybe we should not talk about it right now.
Yeah, it's not a preprint, but this is about the co-authors. Uh, yeah, we have to talk about the lab. So I do it like that, and this.
You need to do small movements or like very slow
Ah,
movements
yeah.
because
Sorry,
then
sorry.
otherwise it's blurry.
Yeah. So this. So here, this is a so-called cave, although the cave is actually this thing, this cube that you see here, which is an VR system where you just stand in, you wear stereo goggles, bit like in a cinema, so not a VR headset, but just
Mm-hmm.
these polarized filter or shutter glasses, and then on these walls, three content is projected. So you see, for example, here is one mirror, and there's a projector, and then uh, oh, if I walk too fast or move too fast, then let me know.
No, it's
So
fine.
here it's a bit messy, like in typical labs.
Yeah, you
But
get
here
a
you see,
real insight into how the laboratory looks.
yeah, but I probably will skip the parts behind the cave. But here you can see this big projectors,
Yeah,
and they project the image on this mirror, and then it gets back projected to the wall.
I see.
But unfortunately, we don't use it anymore. It's actually completely functioning. But these things are really expensive to operate because you need technicians which are just the whole day here
Mm.
to run and maintain the
Mm-hmm.
system. And on the other hand, we have here below, you see
Mm-hmm.
VR headsets, which cost not a couple of tens of thousands of euros, but
Mm-hmm.
just a few hundreds. And a single person like me can develop for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so maybe.
Head-mounted virtual reality has really revolutionized the whole field in this case. Yeah.
uh, what would you expect?
The
Maybe we
hell.
can ask this to the audience. What would they expect how old this VR headset is and how expensive it was?
Oh my! I've This is like alien technology. I've never seen
And
this.
and it's really heavy. It's 1.5 kilos. You
Wow.
get really neck muscles when you wear this.
Yeah. So, question to the audience: what do you
Yeah,
think?
I will
What do
ask.
you think? Yeah, we
Remind me
can
later.
come
I will not
back to it.
forget. But maybe I have here a Quest 3, which is the newest Quest headset from Oculus
Yeah.
or from Meta, what it's now called.
Yeah.
And maybe when we make this comparison.
We have a nice collection there. Oh my! Wow. Yeah. That's.
So yeah, we
Do
have
you also have the big
otherwise.
screen beyond by any chance?
No, and it's also not ordered.
Yeah.
But
It's not great for experiments because you have to mold it to the face, but I would love to try it out.
I also would love to try it out. But yeah, but it seems more like a media consumption device also. Or if I'm wrong,
It has regular SteamVR tracking, so
okay,
it works,
okay.
but it has a cable, so you cannot do wireless. So we have the first estimate that it was 15K. Um,
15K.
yeah,
And which year?
that was not was not
Okay,
said. Yeah.
because
So what year and what was the cost? Yeah.
to give a reference, 2014 Oculus
DK1.
Kickstarter campaign, super successful, broke several records for tech backing on Kickstarter,
Yeah.
and a few hundred euros. Or here, the successor, the DK2 development kit 2, which already had some position tracking. Like with the other headset, you could just rotate your head.
Hmm.
If you would move forward or also translational movement wouldn't be translated into VR. I
Hmm.
was really just looking around like you have with these smartphone-based headsets
Hmm.
that were a few years ago, unfortunately quite popular. I mean, or do you think they did anything good for VR? It was just letting
Yeah.
people experience bad VR that makes them sick, and then they think that also the better quality would be the same.
Yeah, no, I never used that actually, but I also don't think it was a very fortunate part of VR. It's very
Yeah.
interesting actually. I tried the DK2 in Finland when I was there in 2014. I tried a DK2 there, and it was a racing game, and I obviously got sick. so, so that was my first impression of VR, and I also felt like, yeah, this doesn't really have any use case for me. I was not excited about it at the time because I knew I
Mhm.
would get sick, and it's just a monitor in my face. The moment that I got excited about VR was the Vive with 6 degrees of freedom tracking, including
Mhm.
controllers. That was when I realized, okay, this is going to be huge. And it's so funny, also in hindsight, that Oculus, in the beginning, they thought that controllers are unnecessary. They still
Yeah,
shipped
yeah,
the
right.
original Rift CV1 version. They shipped it with an Xbox controller. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I
They,
remember that. I also remember, I was not there, but do you remember Converge VR?
no.
It was one of the first VR chats where you could meet. It was just you had a flying head that rotated like with your head, and you could meet with people.
Uh huh.
And the one of them now works for Rec Room, the other one big screen, or one of them is
Mm-hmm.
I think the one with big screen is not at big screen anymore, but now at Apple. So, but they stayed for a while in the social VR space
Mm-hmm.
also. But this was really where in 2015, 16 there were the big events where you suddenly had 20 or 30 people in a VR chat room, and they all were looking the Oculus product presentation, and there was a or everyone began to laugh hilariously when Palmer Luckey put out the Xbox controller and
Yeah.
said, "Here, it gets shipped with that."
That's yeah. It was a ridiculous moment. Yeah, but at least they figured out that they should do something different there. But that was really the biggest issue with the Oculus. I never
Yeah.
even considered buying one because the Vive would just like yeah it was just obviously better in that regard like for RoomScape VR.
Mm,
So we have the first estimate of the time, which
okay.
I think it's not going to work well. That's 3D Prima said that the glasses would be from 1838.
Close.
Close, yeah, almost.
Yeah.
um,
It feels like they are that old.
yeah, roughly.
Maybe I just in the next um, can talk. So here's our OptiTrack tracking
Oh
space. So you
yeah.
see
How many
always here these
cameras are
cameras.
that?
Although I'm right now optimizing it, here this is not perfect. I recently added more cameras, which were just unused lying around. But right now they face each other, and then they sometimes because here you have infrared light,
Mm-hmm.
and then what you wear are these, you know, this probably these markers you have on
Mm-hmm.
your body, and they reflect this infrared light. But unfortunately, this infrared light from for example, such a camera can be then also seen from a camera on the opposite side.
Ah.
So you would ideally put them all on top and then facing down.
Mm-hmm.
But here we had these rods, so I thought first I tried like that. But I'm right now, maybe we can over here, it's a bit messy, but I'm right now with a 3D printer printing custom-made mounts, and they will then attached here to the cable channel on top.
Oh
So because
wow.
then you can face them really down and they have a good vision. And then here completely around, I hope you can see that, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
The cable
completely
channel,
around
yeah.
that from all sides the cameras are pointing to the user. Um, this should enhance a bit because right now it works well when you're in the middle here. Then it works really well, but as soon as you go a bit closer to the
Mm-hmm.
end of the room, and it's not the biggest space here, then you really quickly run into glitches that suddenly your hand is not tracked anymore and so
Mm-hmm.
on. Here's, by the way, uh, um, a jacket with the same,
Oh
and
yeah.
then of course you wear also some pants. It's always super nice, and people always laugh when I run around here between the buildings in the tracking suit. Probably one day I will also wear the Quest 3 and go with Pest Route, be so super nerd here on the campus.
yeah. Trend setting,
Um,
yeah. So 3D Prima was asking what's the name of it, but I think that we can't give away the name. Obviously, if we give away the name, then you can just Google it. That would be cheating.
Yeah. But we trust in the listeners, right? Or
Yeah, I mean we can.
so it's an
It doesn't matter
N.
anyway.
The company is I think called Visor or Visor, and
Envisor,
the headset Nvis SX something.
Envis SX.
I think this was the name.
I would suspect it's for somehow around the 90s. Something around the 90s, and I would also my guess is let's say 1995 to be precise with 1 year, and my guess for the price would be in the range of 20 to $25,000, something around that.
Okay, shall I give the answer?
Let's give it a few more minutes. Maybe
Okay,
there are
okay,
more comments
yeah,
in the audience there. But
okay,
yeah, no, really interesting. Thank you for showing the lab.
yeah.
That's super
You're
cool.
welcome.
Yeah.
I would also go maybe show the campus outside, but the Wi-Fi is really bad. This
Mm.
is when I go from here, this building, to my office, which is in the next building. It's 50 meters or something. I always have to relog into the Wi-Fi
Mm.
because there's a short disconnect, and uh, unfortunately I cannot really move outside.
Yeah, let's not risk it. Okay,
I
super
mean,
cool.
what I maybe can also show is this. You see this robot behind me,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
was about to
unfortunately not
ask.
working anymore. I don't know what they did here in the lab with it. Came recently back. It was for a long time in some museum that the museum borrowed it, but it was already then not working anymore.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't actually know. I've also seen a smaller robot in the background somewhere.
Yeah. So,
I didn't know
I
that
mean,
you were also working. Yeah, exactly here. You were also working with robots. I thought it's only VR.
I actually don't know why the robots are here. You would need to ask Mel or someone.
Mm.
Um, so I mean, this one looks more like an expensive toy, but I don't know if it was used for research. But
I think I've seen it
honestly, I don't
for
know.
robot football. There were like robot football championships, and they were all made with this standardized robot model.
Ah,
I've seen it there. I know it
oh,
from like my studies in Tübingen. It's quite a while back, um, but it was more for robotics and computer science than for VR. Yeah, because robots look sick is the answer. Yeah, I guess that does make sense. Yeah, I think we should also add robots in our lab just because.
yeah, just because exactly.
Yeah, that's the problem with VR labs. You have a really impressive, super nice VR lab, and it's literally nothing.
This is a perfect VR lab, yes.
It's the best lab is absolute emptiness.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
this is
some
definitely
tracking maybe.
true.
Yeah.
Also, of course, when you then look here, there's so many kind of gloves and all stuff. I
Mm.
mean, this is all something that you wouldn't want to use today anymore. There's Quest finger tracking probably better than any kind of glove that we have here from the last 10
Mm.
or 20 years.
Yeah, gloves are
Um,
interesting for feedback, but not for tracking definitely anymore.
mm, yeah,
It's so interesting how the consumer space has changed the research space here. It's just so um, such a huge wave that is now like sweeping over the research with the behavioral sciences and also the neurosciences with virtual reality. I'm really glad to be part of it. Actually, yeah, it's
yeah,
very interesting to experience this firsthand.
yeah, and also to be part of it when it just started. I mean, VR is
Mm.
something that you find in research labs for decades, but it was always a niche, always a smaller topic. And since 2015, 16, it suddenly is a thing outside of a few handful of VR labs.
Yeah. And what are you
Um,
doing with the OptiTrack system nowadays? That you probably also have SteamVR, right, for tracking. So.
yes, but the OptiTrack is better for full body tracking. You have
Mm.
really much more points on your body, and then it's also you have advantages of having a completely optical tracking system. So,
Mm-hmm.
from SteamVR, the tracking uh, is first of all called dead reckoning. You have in a VR headset a so-called IMU, or an inertial measurement unit, which is essentially a gyroscope, something you can use to measure an orientation. So it's always something that always points down so you know where the gravity goes, so you know how you're oriented, and a accelerometer to measure acceleration. And you can use that to calculate with integration to calculate the direction and the speed of movement. And then when you know where you start, then relative to your starting point, you always know where you are when you know how you moved.
Mm-hmm.
The problem here is that you always make this relative to your starting point, so every measurement error accumulates and you have a drift over time. This is something you can, for example, experience with these 3 degrees of freedom headsets like the
Mm-hmm.
DK1 that I showed, where you can just rotate. Uh, they also just work with these IMUs. And when you start a game, then maybe this direction is forward in the game. And half an hour later, that direction is forward because it drifted, because it's just accumulating errors. And the Steam VR tracking then has an optical component, the lighthouse system, which is are laser beams sweeping through this tracking space, and the headset has photodiodes and can measure this, and this can be used then to determine the location of the headset and of the controllers. The problem here is, so the good thing is it's super precise. There is also no accumulating error. It's always a new measurement, independent measurement. The problem is it's slow. So it's every 60 hertz, every 16 milliseconds there is a sweep. But what to do in between? And so these headsets use a combination where they first of all do this stage reckoning, and they use then this optical accurate tracking to just correct for this origin. The problem here is with these IMUs that they are not just moving motion, but also other forces. Like a few years ago, one of my colleagues in the lab, where I did my PhD in Jülich in the Forschungszentrum or research, I should drink something, I think. Um, in the research center, a colleague recorded animations using a system that we also have here. It's called perception neuron. It's lots of sensors, but always just these IMUs, just no optical sensor, just this internal or inertial measurement units. And he used it to he did a study on autism, and there was some daily activities, so like brooming the floor, and it could be done in a positive or neutral way or in a negative way, and the patients needed to see from an abstract avatar to try to detect if someone is in a positive mood, negative mood, and so on. And in a meeting, we were discussing artifacts that they had. It was always that there was spikes suddenly when in the tracking data. Tracking
Mm-hmm.
data was like you would expect, and then suddenly spikes, and they came from these IMUs, and always when you step on the ground, because
Mm-hmm.
suddenly there is a force going on the sensor, which is you stop the movement, the energy needs to go somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and then you measure something in the opposite direction. And here is the advantage when you have something like OptiTrack, which is just measuring this location of these ball markers. That you don't have these kind of influences, and yeah, then it's you can just cover the body in more detail. Like with the Steam VR tracking, you need always a certain number of photodiodes for each sensor visible at the same time, so
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't get them as small as these small balls that we have here for. I mean, I can show this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you always have to like even the
Yeah,
smallest tracker, they are like this.
this is a
Yeah,
Vive tracker.
yeah.
I mean, this is one device you could use for tracking. This is one of these markers. You would need
Yeah.
more of them. Also, you need, I think, 3 or 4 of them visible at the
Mm.
same time. But you can distribute them. But you would have all of 4 of them at a different location. And here it's one rigid body,
Mm.
so you can always just have one point. So you can here get the higher resolution.
Mm.
And then it's maybe sometimes also. I mean, we had recently this was that we talked about this that um, often things in science are not perfectly optimized to be also used in industry. And I think with the tracking, it's a bit Steam VR tracking is not made or does not provide the same tools as OptiTrack, for example, to clean up your animations. You always have artifacts. There is suddenly something was not detected, and the hands often have some jitter also, and they need to go into the tracking data and to post-process it.
Mm.
And this is something you don't have native tools, for example, with SteamVR, which
Mm.
also makes it more difficult than to work with these animations.
Mm. That could be, yeah. Yeah, I mean, normally we've also, so when we worked with motion tracking data, also with the face-based tracking system with active LEDs, we also just did all our post-processing ourselves. It's a funny story. 5 years ago or something, I've read about the €1 filter,
Mm,
which is a very interesting filter that automatically adapts the high pass strength, the cutoff frequency, based on the current speed or like the rate of change. So it's a kind of interesting idea that they change the filter if the signal is changing as a lot, which would otherwise be filtered out, but
mm,
it's not, it's more than an artifact, like not just a glitch. Then at some point they increase the threshold so that you can quickly catch up, and then if your controller, for example, is calm, then you can then the filter is very low, so that basically no movement, no jitter is still in the data. And the funny
ah,
thing is,
mm,
this filter I got to know like years ago, and now it is implemented in an open composite version that we use for Skyrim, because I told the developer to check out this filter.
mm,
And he was like, "Yeah, that's really
nice.
useful." And now we have an open composite version that works with Virtual Desktop in our Skyrim list, which uses this filter directly
This,
from my research, or like from what I researched a few years ago. Like not my filter, but I found
mm,
it through my research. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, but your research had an impact on the real world.
yeah.
I
That's really
think this
cool.
is not so often seen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, this is why I love doing this. Also, this is why I love
Mm,
doing this the stream here, right? Because this kind of real world impact is really for me very motivating. Yeah. So I think the we have a very smooth segue here, because probably the reason why you are using the
mm,
OptiTrack system and full body tracking is because you have avatars in VR, right?
see.
So we can smoothly segue into your research topics with ethics and avatar, because obviously that's the advertised topic. And before we continue nerding
Mm,
for the next hour,
okay,
we
yeah,
should maybe
good
go to
point.
there.
Yes, so where do I start? So maybe with avatars. So avatars are a big thing here, because it greatly enhances your VR experience when you have a body, or let's say when you don't have a body at all, so not even hands or something that represents a hand location. It's really hard to interact because we always look also where is our body when we interact with the world. But it's also that you experience VR as that you have this experience that this could be really happening. This enhances when you have a body. Um, and this is called embodiment when you use an avatar in virtual reality. And embodiment is simply just this process. You interact with your own body and you watch yourself, like you look down at yourself or you look into a mirror and you see this virtual body moves like your real body, which then results in a body ownership illusion. Um, so you really, it feels like it's your body. This can be, for example, measured when you pose a threat to this virtual
Mhm.
body, then people will respond if they are really under threat. A more real-world example is this rubber hand illusion that some people might know. So you put a rubber hand on a table and your hand next to it but hidden. So then you watch another person stroking the rubber hand up and down with a brush, for example, while your real hand is also stroked, but you don't see it. So you see here stroking, and here you feel the stroking, and suddenly you have the impression that this is your hand, although it's just a rubber hand, and you see. So it can be obviously a rubber hand. It does not need to be fully realistic for that. And this is essentially what we also do in VR when we give people an avatar. Um, and then it's also for like for social interaction also important for nonverbal language and so on. You can way better express yourself. This is, for example, also already when uh, the Valve Index came out. VR headset that had the first controllers with finger tracking. So the controllers are attached to your hand, and then there are sensors which measure if your finger is attached, touching it or not. And it's quite simple. It's not super realistic, but then, for example, you have the ability in a game, in a multiplayer game, so like a shooter game, you want to invade um, Festung, so you want to invade the enemy somehow,
Fortress,
and
yeah.
if you want to communicate with your partner, with another player, and you can do one, two, three, and then let's go in. Also,
Mm-hmm.
you can signal things completely different, and having a full body, of course, is step up just compared to hands, but hands alone already make a lot here. Um, the thing is with avatars that they have quite an effect on us. So on the one side, it could be when the avatar is not completely synchronously moving like we do. There's, for example, the so-called self-avatar follower effect. This is something I had in, it was not my first VR experience. My very first VR experience, maybe we can talk later about it if you're interested, was in the 90s, in the middle of the 90s. I was
Really?
maybe 12 or so. I was with a friend and his mother. We were in a theme park and they had a boxing game in VR. Um, but what I want to talk now is about now is my first VR experience in 2014 with the DK2. I told you before, a friend told me suddenly, here, I have something, come over, I need to show you something. And what I tried was called, what was the name? Sideline chair or something. I think the graphics did not age that well, but otherwise it's a nice experience because you just sit, so it's no risk of motion sickness, for example. There's no virtual locomotion, or almost no, there's one or two points where you move a bit. But the thing is just you sit there and you look around, and always when you look around in your background, the scene changes. So in the one moment you are in a room, and then turn around and suddenly you're on a raining street,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of cool. Uh, what I here come to the avatars. In this scenario, because you are seating, you cannot move your arms. It was just looking around. Uh, you cannot move your body, so you can make an avatar. You can present an avatar without tracking. And there was an avatar with the arms on the arm leans
Mm-hmm.
of the chair, and I saw that, and it felt weird, and I immediately put my arms in the same way that I sit like this
Mm-hmm.
avatar. There was no point for it. It didn't make any difference for the game, but I had this feeling I need to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
this is something you can actually really measure when you make an offset between. So you could measure here's the hand, but you present the virtual hand a bit with an offset. Then participants try to move into that direction with their real hand
Mm-hmm.
to minimize this mismatch, which is this avatar follower effect. Um, but that's just one thing. One also famous effect is the so-called Proteus effect. It was first described, I think, by Jeremy Basin. He's also one of these pioneers in VR, doing it, I think, since the early 2000s in Stanford at the Human Computer Interaction Lab. And they compared the behavior of participants in a study where one group of the participants were embodied in an avatar that was quite good looking, and the other one in not so good looking avatars. And I don't know exactly what the task or the procedure was, but what they found was that people with a better looking avatar are more self-confident, more open about talking about their feelings, about what's going on, and so on. Um, while not so good looking avatar has the opposite effect.
Wow.
And the idea is, and was tested with different things, like for example, also you can do this with gender, and men, for example, will behave more like they think a woman behaves. So this is an important thing here. Um, how people behave is probably that they try to conform with social expectations, and suddenly you are a woman, so you don't sit there with your legs spread wide and taking much space, but instead you make a more smaller poses. It's a bit exaggerated, but this is what you observe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Does this
here's what
effect translate into the real life afterwards? Or is it
this is
only in
a
the
good
virtual
question.
reality?
I honestly don't know. But this is a good question. I should look into this one point. Um, but uh, I think that this effect already has in VR quite implication or can
Mm-hmm.
have implications. Right now, it's not so much But consider, for example, I mean, it's total speculation. I don't know any research on this, but maybe it's, for example, possible when you suddenly are embodied in an avatar that looks like a rich person,
Mm-hmm.
that you also have the feeling you are richer than you are. And now consider you are in a virtual showroom, you want to buy a new car.
Mm.
You are there, you can experience different cars and you can modify them on the go and say, okay, now let's try this leather, the sound system also. But you also make the deal there. You also sign the contract. So you
Mm-hmm.
really spend real money on a car, on a real car later, but this happens virtually. If I would be the owner of this showroom, I would give you an avatar that gives you hopefully the feeling that you are wealthy and have a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it will not make a huge difference, but maybe in the end you buy the little bit more expensive sound
Mm-hmm.
system or something, because you kind of feel that you need to conform with these expectations that you are wealthy and you need to show, you need to prove that you have a lot of money, although you know you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
That's a scary thought, to be
Mm.
honest. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
this is true. Yeah,
Although,
the way that
when,
our avatars can manipulate ourselves.
and I think this is actually something where in the long run we would need something like, how to say, an anatomy about our appearance in VR. So right now, the developer, the companies who provide us with VR applications or business apps or whatever, they decide how we look. We might have, in some cases, options for modifications.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Meta Horizon, you can modify your avatar, but it's always the same rendering style, and you are limited what you can do. Um, and if you really assume, I mean, this is of course something we also need more research how
Mm-hmm.
like these effects, are there transition effects to the real world and so on. Um, but if we could control how we look everywhere in VR, so like the applications or at least business applications where you spend real money, also maybe in a game, this is something different, especially a game with narrative. But in other applications, when you, for example, there would be a standardized format for avatars, and you can upload your own avatar, or you upload a picture, and they create an avatar, which is something we do here. So when you participate in a study here, we'll get an avatar that looks like you,
Mm.
based on a frontal photo. It's just you stand like this in this, not P, it's so-called A pose.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have yeah, computer algorithm. I don't know what exactly happens. This colleagues makes it. For me, it's just magic. I upload pictures, and then a few an hour later, an avatar comes out of it. So you basically take the picture and wrap it around an avatar, and also reshapes the avatar on the proportions of the body. So something like that would be also an option, but that you really but I think in the long term, at least assuming that the metaverse and really doing more than just gaming in VR will be a thing at some point, then we would need something like that, that we can really ensure we look how we want to look, and that it's not dictated by someone else who might have some other interest with
Mm.
that. So like if I would then go and buy a car, I would look like a homeless person, of course. So maybe it helps then to save some money
Mm-hmm.
if I would choose my avatar on my own. So I
Mm.
mean, then you could try the opposite.
Or
Um,
it's also this whole field of cosmetics, right? You have this trend of free to play games and all that stuff, and cosmetics are normally just treated as, yeah, this is safe. Yeah, you can have a game where people are spending money on cosmetics, but it's not evil.
mhm,
And that's kind of the good part of free to play. But if you think about a VR avatar, at that point, all of a sudden, this could become very real, and it could really manipulate your psychological, I don't know, mental health aspects and whatever. If you start out in a game where you are poor and you also look poor, and you can spend real money to look better,
mm,
and look more sophisticated, or like improve your yeah. This is this would be, yeah, it's very interesting. Things that are irrelevant or barely relevant in flat screen games suddenly become very real. We have some
exactly.
discussions in the chat going on.
Okay.
So first of all, I think we can lift the question on the VR.
Okay, yeah. So, so far, guesses were not so precise. The headset, I don't know the exact release date. What I found was circa 2010.
Okay.
And we bought this year in 2012 for, I think Mel said 45,000.
Oh wow. Okay, so I
So
was
we
way too
published this.
early, 10 years too early, and half the price was my
Yeah.
estimate. Oh shit. Oh wow.
So in
Okay.
the last paper that was published from here was in 2018. I don't know when the data was collected. I was just when I searched for information about this specific headset, one of the first things was the name of a colleague of mine where I thought, oh, research from our lab. So it
Cool.
didn't make this, not many people in the world probably had this headset, I guess.
Yeah, I can imagine. Very cool. So someone in the chat said that it actually also already had 1280 by 1024 pixels, and it also had eye tracking. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
That's really interesting because it's not so much different from our current headsets. I mean, yes, it's
Mm,
half the resolution, but or no, a quarter because it's in both dimensions half. But still, considering that it's like 20 years old,
mm,
10 years
that's
old.
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years old. Still very impressive. Yeah, no wonder it was so
Mm,
expensive. Yeah, and including eye tracking. Yeah,
yeah.
this is a fact that I didn't know. So I have that going for me. Okay, very cool. Yeah, and
But
then there's a question in the chat asking, so would players in a game also choose to act more violent with a brute avatar compared to, for example, a librarian?
I don't have any research on this, but this is for most of these things a problem. There is not much research on these
Mm.
things. But if you really experience your body yourself as some aggressive or brutal person, then following the logic from the Proteus effect, yes, and then I would expect that it could behave. So if you look like someone who is super strong, has muscles on mass, then maybe you feel stronger, and then maybe people also start to be more aggressive because they think now they can.
Mm.
I was once. Do you know the experience Beach Boys Bros?
No.
It's just a few minutes where you walk in VR along a beach. It's comic style. It looks a bit similar, I think, to what's this bloody game where all people gone.
Oh, Gorn.
Yeah. So a bit
my
like that
my
art
hand
style,
still remembers Gorn.
not completely so different colors and so on, but this rendering style, I think it was a
Yeah.
bit similar. But you just walk along the street and then you make here, if you would lift weights, and you always get stronger and stronger
Hmm.
and really make something with you and you feel stronger. And when you're, I think when then someone has a personality that they actually maybe have this interest to fight with others,
Hmm.
but maybe they are not confident or they know they have no chance against others or something that maybe this could then change that they behave more aggressive because they think now they can and because they feel more confident.
Super
So yeah,
interesting.
I would say yes, but we need research on this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially this carryover effect into the physical reality is quite interesting. But it probably it becomes less and less relevant the more prevalent VR becomes, right? So if we are at some point, if we have VR glasses that are so nice and lightweight that we spend a significant amount of time in them, which is currently not the case even for me, um,
Mm,
at some point it will change probably, and at that point it is not that important, or it becomes less important if these kind of effects carry over into the physical reality, because the virtual reality is so real, it's
mm,
so ubiquitous at that point that it is still relevant even if it does not carry over. Yeah.
I completely agree, but uh, but then you have the same problems in VR. I mean, then you do the same things that you would do in the real world, where you would have the carryover effect. Then you do these in VR and have the same effects
Yeah.
there. Um, But regarding carryover effects, so the Proteus effect is not the only thing how you can change how people behave or see the world by giving them an avatar. And here's also where we come closer to my own work and to what our lab here does or has done quite some research on, and where we could also measure that there are really effects on the real world as much as you can test this in a laboratory, like on a
Mm.
computer screen. But there is some research from our lab, but also from others, that when you embody someone in a body of another group, like another race, so a white guy embodied in a black person, then this can reduce racial biases or implicit racial biases. We all have biases against others. This is not against race only, it's just against groups, in-group, out-group members. We always see our in-group members a bit more positive than out-group members, like football teams
Hmm.
and so on. And and this is something you can measure with a reaction time task, where you just have associations between, for example, the standard is for when you want to test for biases against black or against white people, then you would show black or white faces and associations or positive and negative words, and then you can uh, measure how long people need to categorize things. It's a bit cryptic now, but I don't want to explain all the tasks. It would be
The
boring.
implicit association task is
Uh,
quite a
but it's
staple, yeah. But it's
yeah,
also, I've heard that it has received some critical thoughts recently.
yeah, there were always, I think, there's some papers. There's one paper, for example, that I constantly, when I Google this, it's one of the first I have in Google Scholar, is something, it has something like implicit association task, a test waiting for a concept. Uh,
Okay,
um,
nice title.
but on the other hand, there are no real alternatives, let's
Mm.
say. So there is, when you compare it with other tests that try to test this, and then it makes reliable and replicatable effects
Mm.
like you can measure basically everyone who's listening now. There is a webpage from Harvard where you can make all kinds of implicit association tasks yourself. And I would bet you can correct me later, but I would expect that every one of us would, for example, for everyone who's white, would you would measure a slight biases against black people.
Mm.
Um, this is something that is totally normal. I mean, this is evolutionary. It probably makes sense that your own group is you see your own group in a better light than others, because others could be dangerous. I'm not in the chat right now in Twitch, so I put a link here. Maybe Marius, you can put it back on
Sure,
Twitch
yeah,
in the chat.
I can do that.
This is where you can make this test for example, black and white faces, but also with other categories, I think, and they give you a result immediately.
Yeah.
And this is also where there's this web page where a lot of studies are based on about the implicit association task, which would use to, for example, improve the scoring, the different kind of how you can score it, and so on. Um, but yeah, to make it short, yes, there is criticism, but it's not as if there would be a good alternative.
Yeah.
And it's not as bad as it might sound in the first moment. And then it's also, I mean, this is always with these concepts. I mean, this falls somehow, I would say, in social cognition a bit. So this is always also like social interactions. It's way harder to put into clear concepts into a paradigm than study attention allocation.
Hmm.
So this is, I think, comes also with the problem what you want to measure. It's just a more abstract concept, implicit biases than to say the attentional focus is here or is there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me think how I go on. So, but yeah, so this is a test that we can use to measure these biases, and I said usually you measure them in all of us to a certain degree against
Hmm.
other groups. Unfortunately, some more than others, but it's not bad when you are a bit biased. It's not necessarily that you are a bad person, let's say. Um, but yeah, what you can then do, or what here in the study was done, this test was done with black and white faces and then positive, negative words before participants experienced VR,
Hmm.
and then they were entered VR and were embodied in a black avatar. Again, they stand in front of a mirror. They can move their arms, their legs, and they can see in themselves in the mirror the body move. So this should be my body. So they get experiences as their own body, or have an illusion of body ownership. And in this study, the participants had then, I think, a 12-minute long Tai Chi session. So there was, I think, an Asian trainer. So it was not a white person. It was not a black person, in the sense a neutral group, so to say, and they made some movements and told you, hey, do this, do that. This was all. There was no task. There was no nothing you can do wrong or right. And then the same test, the IIT or association task, was repeated. and participants then showed lower scores in their biases against black people, which was repeated a week later. Again, they
Hmm?
just did this implicit association test, and the effect was still there. I think
Oh, really?
I'm not sure if it was maybe a bit lower. I would need to look that up, but it was still there. So this seems to be really a lasting effect.
Hmm.
Um, and Yeah, and there are more studies that show similar things, how you can, when you embody someone of an outgroup member, how you can
Hmm.
increase compassion or empathy towards this group. And the theory here is because we experience this body as our own body, and we experience or we process it in the context of our own self-concept. So it neural on a neuronal level, so to say, the processing overlaps of our own body and this virtual body, and in this moment is our own body a little bit. And like we tend to favor people from our own group, we almost always tend to favor ourselves over others. So
Hmm.
we always see us in a more positive light, and then basically we associate, so for example, a black person a bit more with ourselves, and therefore we associate them also more positively. This is the idea here. Um,
It's an interesting point then. So that would mean that the empathy machine of VR, this effect, is not because it reduces the lack of empathy for our group, but it just bridges that you still feel like the previously felt out group person, you feel more associated with them, so they become more in group. But it doesn't really reduce your bias against out group.
no, this is not against a specific group, of course.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
So
that's
you
true.
don't become a better person. You just become like um,
Yeah, I mean,
more
if you
empathic
are
with
less
the.
biased against black people, of course, it does not affect other groups, but in the sense, yeah, better person is a big word, but
It
maybe a
was
little bit.
hyperbole.
Um, so, but yeah, but this is all cool, and it shows a bit that VR can be used as an empathy machine, which is, by the way, a term that was coined, or the first person who made this phrase famous was Chris Milk. In 2015, he gave a TED talk about where he thought that VR is the ultimate empathy machine.
Mm-hmm.
And to demonstrate this, they released a 360-degree video documentation from a refugee camp close to Syria. So there was a small girl, Sidra was her name, and you just followed her through the day in VR. It was just a video, it was not interactive or anything, but you could look around, so you could essentially see what's behind the camera. I don't know if it's still available somewhere, but it's something, it was definitely an interesting and moving experience to see
Mm-hmm.
what the daily life at such a refugee camp is, and then where you really see how lucky we can be that we live here and not in Syria or in a similar country with similar problems. Um, but yeah, I think that this approach of 360-degree videos is not the best approach in the long term. It was maybe at that time it was good. VR was way more limited than it's right now in certain sense, or there were not standard tools to easily create an avatar, embody it, and so on. And making a 360-degree video was in this context of not a bad idea, but um, the problem is a bit you are still just a passive observer. You can look around, you see a bit more, but you're not part of the scene, so to say, of the event, but a passive and detached observer. And good VR is actually the quite opposite. Than in VR, you want there's always this sense of presence that people talk about. Which is traditionally described or defined as the feeling of being there. Something almost anyone quickly knows what you mean with it when they put on an HMD. Like this what you see is not real, but you cannot prevent yourself from having the feeling that it's at least partially it could be real. So like when you're exposed to a height, most people react like they would do in the real world with the same also physiological measures. There's a study that used Richie's Planck experience,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I mean, you know it, but it's a commercial application where you just in a few hundred meters height walk over a small wooden plank without any security. So something no one of us hopefully would ever consider to do in the real world. but we can do it in VR, which is also one of these nice aspects for research. We can create situations which would be not ethically possible in the real world because they would be just
Mm.
insanely dangerous.
Do you
Um,
know the trolley problem?
mm,
Do you know this VR recreation of the trolley problem?
I know one VR recreation, but I don't know if you talk about the same.
Yeah, it was something where they had to throw someone off into there was I think the cover story was that there was a generator and it would blow up and you have to throw someone in there and then it could prevent the blow up in some way and
Mm,
uh, and I think they at some point they placed a real person in the position where there was the
mm.
avatar and luckily far fewer people actually pushed then but still some
This is
did it, yeah.
definitely good to know. No, I didn't know about that study. I just know about one where they also did this trolley dilemma with other dilemmata in VR, and then later they looked on the behavior and separated the groups into more altruistic people
Mm.
and more egoistic people. There was, for example, also one scenario. There was burning building, and there was someone was stuck under a part of the building that fell down. And the
Mm-hmm.
question is, do you go there, risking your own life, virtually at least,
Mm.
to help that person? Also, these things. And what they found was anatomical difference in the insula, I think, in the right insula,
Mm-hmm.
which there was something bigger when were more empathetic or more
Mm.
altruistic.
Interesting, okay.
Um,
So there's a question in the chat
mhm.
about this identification with the avatar, which is there a limit to how far this association with the avatar will happen? Like, if the avatar is a different gender, build, height, origin, and health, e.g., missing limbs, would one still associate with it?
So I cannot really say for these effects with the implicit association task what you measure there. It would be also then the question what kind of attributes. So this with this black and white people, it's always positive or negative, but you could do this also with other attributes like
Mm.
smart, stupid, or something like that. Um, I don't know, I lost my point or what I wanted to say.
So the question is about like, how different can an avatar be
Ah,
such
right.
that you still feel
Yeah.
that it is you, I guess.
So when the avatar moves like you, then it can be quite different in terms of body ownership. Then
Mm.
it can be woman, it can be an alien. This all works quite well. Um, but
What about missing limbs or maybe extra limbs? So, for
this is
example,
interesting.
if we use physiological measurements like on the forehead, and
Mm,
we have ears that then move depending on your muscle activity or stuff like that,
this is indeed
kind of
interesting, but I
interesting,
don't
right?
know of any research that has done this. There's no research where they, for example, test different realism of hands, so have a real hand
Mm.
or maybe just some abstract elements for the different bones.
Yeah.
And it's different. Some studies find effects difference between realistic hands on unrealistic hands.
Yeah.
Others don't. It depends a lot on what kind of task you do, and yeah, and then again, there's really way more research on that.
Mm.
But in general, for embodiment and body ownership, it can be quite different. I think there is a bit more research on the rubber hand illusion where it's also it can be really a totally unrealistic hand. What, for example, here is important that it's anatomically correct.
Mm-hmm.
So when your real hand is placed like that, but the rubber hand is placed like this, then it's way harder to elicit the illusion.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, having here obviously rubber hand, while this is my real hand, um, so where you really see this as a rubber hand, this does not prevent the illusion from happening.
Mm.
Which is also with VR. I mean, you always know what you experience is not real. I mean, you also feel it with a bulky headset and so on. With the current tech, there's always a lot of things reminding you this is not real. Although this is probably also, even with better technology, we always should know that we just entered a VR experience. There might be in short moments, actually, I think there's evidence that we might forget in short moments that we are in virtual environment. I mean, this you can see on YouTube, for example, with all these from VR to
Mm-hmm.
ER videos, where
Yeah.
where something happens, a scary scene, jump scare, and someone just starts to run.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but maybe I can let me just share my screen. I can show a video of myself where I fortunately did not do this. This is from 2015, and it was the second time that I used the DK2. And I was not knowing that I was filmed by a friend. Um,
I think I also have such a video where I played what's it called? The Vanishing Realms.
I don't know if audio will be, but yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, no, yeah, it's just a
But,
sim.
by the way, before let me just go back. So here on the TV, for the listeners on the TV, what you see is this is what I see. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting here, and this is what I see. It's quite dark. Did you hear this?
No, audio
Uh,
doesn't. I think you
Maybe it's a
can.
little less embarrassing,
No,
although.
this is something that I also experienced. Definitely, I think you can somehow in one of your settings you can change the fact that you share
Yeah,
audio with
I
your
was looking
screen
for
sharing.
that.
But I think we can all imagine.
Yeah,
Uh,
but I would just right now.
it was the same with me. I played Phasmophobia.
Mm,
I will definitely always remember that.
okay. Yeah, but Phasmophobia is definitely can be quite scary.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't matter what's the sound. It was to make the sound. It was something like that. I did
Okay,
it was
that's
not really.
that's
Sounds a bit
pretty tame.
embarrassing.
For me, it was
And
definitely not her. It was a
yeah,
full-blown scream from the
yeah.
bottom of my soul.
And afterwards, you hear when I noticed that I was recorded, you could also hear me asking my friend, "Did Hast du mich gerade aufgenommen, du Arsch? Did you just record me, you ass?"
Yeah, true. Yeah. Do you know the YouTuber Havey?
No.
You should. It's a really, really cool YouTube channel about VR. Just a all around brilliant, friendly, and very approachable YouTuber. Really cool. Just every Saturday there are new videos about things that he liked and did during the
Okay, I
week.
need to look it up.
Um, and and he has one recurrent theme, and that is that he is easily scared, and he keeps playing these games where, yeah, one of the games is actually, I think it was SCP, where he broke his microphone because he
Oh,
screamed so loud that the microphone broke. Yeah, that could be me as well. Yeah, VR is really immersive. Even after
yeah.
years of playing Skyrim, I know exactly what happens, but even after
Mm,
years of playing Skyrim, I still get chills down my spine
mm.
if there's a giant spider coming from the ceiling.
Yeah, this is also I once with Richie's plank experience for 2 or 3 weeks. It was every day just once quickly starting, putting on the headset and going back and forth. So I
Hmm.
was quickly able to go back and forth over the plank, but always with shaking legs and not really feeling comfortable there. And also
Hmm.
after about 2 weeks doing this every day, it gets a bit better, but you never feel comfortable. It would never be something where I would just think, okay, I sit
Hmm.
down and enjoy the view.
Yeah. So we are already 1.5 hours in. From my side, that's great, and we
Mm,
also still have yours, so that's also great. I'm happy that you're all still here. But maybe we can turn back a little bit towards this empathy machine thing. So,
yeah.
if we're taking a top level perspective there, what what would you think are the most interesting or most important findings there? And especially the question: is it actually true? Is it an empathy machine?
Mm,
Or not? Maybe are these findings artificial in the sense that they can be maybe reproduced in the lab,
mm.
but not in real life? Or what interesting findings do you know here, or can you maybe talk about it?
So what definitely is quite promising is all in this kind of perspective taking, which is also this embodiment in a black avatar goes a bit in this direction. There is another study which was also here from the lab and a PhD student who was working here, and the participants were convicted sexual offenders.
Oof. Like
So
real
of course
real sex
it was
offenders.
voluntary. No one was
Okay.
forced to participate, but it was real offenders.
Okay.
And they switched the roles. They created a scene where the offenders embodied a woman, a
Mm-hmm.
female avatar, who was then offended by others. And having this experience increased or helped them to differentiate or to recognize negative emotions in women.
Mm.
I don't remember exactly the mechanism they discussed, but they tested this with a test where you present pictures of people where the emotional expression in the face and the emotional expression of the body is either congruent or incongruent. So
Mm-hmm.
congruent would be something like I smile and have wide open arms or something.
Mm-hmm.
But then incongruent would be something I have a pose where I really look scared, but I smile.
Mm.
So this doesn't fit together. And offenders have it's been shown in studies that offenders are less able to recognize these incongruent
Oh,
emotions.
okay.
And that this is correlated also with recognizing emotions in people in general. And this improved after having this experience. I don't think that they did some follow-up like a week later if this
Mm.
was lasting, but after this experience being harassed or being offended in VR, um, they improved in this test. So apparently they are better able to recognize that a woman is experiencing fear.
Mm.
I think this is often really something with sexual offenders. I bet often these are not bad guys who intend to do something bad, but who are maybe not good in seeing and detecting boundaries, and that they're crossing boundaries.
It's a difficult situation
Yeah,
there.
it's.
I would
I mean, it's
definitely
difficult.
not go as far as that they are
I
just
also
not
don't want to
able
talk
to.
about
Yeah.
all of them, but I think a lot of situations where men are. It's not. I don't want to generalize it. There are a lot
Yeah.
of assholes out there, so to make that clear. But I think there are also cases where it's really where boundaries are just crossed because people don't see the boundaries, and then
Mm.
the trouble happens. And I think these things here, this can happen that people are better able to detect that they cross boundaries.
Mm.
There's also one study which was kind of similar. It was about sexual harassment, and men were embodied in a female avatar sitting in a bar, and then
Mm-hmm.
other avatars, male avatars came over and were asking them to the number and so on, and were getting more and more pushy
Mm.
and racing. And this was also that later. I don't remember how exactly they tested it, but they observed less harassment or better scores in some tests
Mm.
for that afterwards. Um, but to your question, is VR really an empathy machine? I think it can be, but it can be also the opposite. And this is actually what my research here is about. There's a lot of research. How can we use VR to make the world a bit better,
Mm.
for use VR for good? And maybe fortunately, or on the one side, I think it's good that there is almost no research where people try to do something bad with it. I mean, this is, in one sense, it's not something positive that there's not a big interest in trying to exploit everything. But it's, of course, a risk when we don't understand the negative effects. And when you consider, for example, this reduction in implicit racial bias when you're embodied in a black avatar. Now consider a game like GTA or especially GTA San Andreas, which is supposed to come some point for Meta Quest. Although I'm not sure. I mean, they didn't talk about it in quite a while, but it was announced a few years ago.
Mm.
And in that game, you play a black character who just came out of prison, coming back into your old hood or to your old to family and your friends, and immediately are back in this circles where you do criminal things, and then the game is just full of unethical behavior, of stealing, killing, and whatsoever. Um, and you play this, people play these games for hundreds of hours. So, but here no one can tell you what is the effect here. So for something like that, we would need more research if to really learn if this can have negative effects and could increase biases against black people. I mean, like consider someone who plays that game who already has this idea, associates black people with weapons and violence, and then you play a game that really confirms these stereotypes or these biases.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, but there is almost no research on this. There are lots of papers discussing these kind of issues, but the research is lacking, and this is why I'm now here. So the research project that I'm working on is a result of a discussion between my boss Mel Slater and an advisory group from industry and academic partners in the EU. There was, for example, someone from Meta or from Magic Leap to discuss how need to we to what need, do we need to learn and how do we need to approach things to avoid ethical pitfalls, ethical problems of the technology. And yeah, one of the projects that I just started with is exactly this racial biases, if we can change them in VR by embodiment, but not trying to reduce them, but to increase them.
Mm-hmm.
Although this is, of course, something, it's a
Tricky.
touchy subject, yeah, a subject when you think of that you use black people, for example, for it, like it was done in this positive case before.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of effects that we measure are not huge effects. It's not like that someone who is liberal suddenly will vote right wing or something after having such a VR experience.
Mm.
But even if there's some small, little bit more biases, this is a real effect that I don't want to produce. I don't want to increase biases against anyone with my research.
Mm.
Um, so, and here the idea is. Instead, I will not tell what exactly we have in mind, so we don't give too much away. I mean, no one would spoil too early about research, but the idea is to test a group to increase biases against a group that does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, a virtual group,
Ah, I
or
see. Yes. Yeah.
like a model organism in biology, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so then yeah, there is no person there that could be target of this bias later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really something, I hope that this really works, but I'm quite positive that we can make people hate someone who does not exist. But then you could really research this, which was much more freedom because you don't need to be afraid to have
Mm-hmm.
negative effects on the
Mm-hmm.
real world. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's
yeah,
a
this
really
is,
interesting idea. Yeah. To we've also in our research group we've recently discussed the point that we need to do more evil,
mm,
because the evil will be done anyways, and it's better to put it out there in the open and make clear what can be done, especially if you're also considering the whole brain computer interface, like extracting data, and
mm,
stuff like that, or extracting information. These kind of things is super critical, obviously, and I think it's a necessary approach. But I also understand, for obvious reasons, why many researchers don't want to do it, because you don't want to be associated with evil research. You
exactly.
don't want to do evil research, obviously, as
Mm,
well. And but also even from the other perspective. So the Declaration of Helsinki for research prohibits any kind of research that has a lasting effect on the participant.
mm,
That's the core concept of ethical research, is that you don't want any effect on the participant.
mm,
And effectively, even if you reduce bias, even if you can reliably say that a person becomes extremely nice
mm,
and they are being more joyful and more empathetic with people in their surroundings after they do our experiment, from an ethical review board perspective, you are technically not allowed to do that
mm. Yeah,
because
although I
it goes
think
against
this
the
is one.
declaration. Yeah.
Although I think this is one of these points, but for the Declaration of Helsinki, I think it's also explained that uh, in some circumstances where it's really that you can justify also to go a bit further when it's necessary to do some research
Mm.
and when it's the pro and cons, when you can say that it's worth to do it. But yeah, this is definitely always on a borderline, and I'm already
Mm.
afraid of the ethics proposal.
I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is already when you just measure reaction times and show Gabor patches, sometimes a pain.
Yeah, yeah, I am aware of it.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, ethics proposals also with electrophysiological data are quite a thing. Also, the whole point of incidental findings. What do you do
mm.
if you suddenly realize someone only has half a brain? Um, these cases have happened. Yeah, that
Yeah, I have
they
seen
were
that
functional.
myself.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you realize something is very weird in the EEG.
Mm.
There is
This
no brain.
happens. That happens more often than you think. I've
Yeah.
done before I moved to VR. I've done a lot of fMRI research, and also afterwards because I was one of the few people who you needed to do something like a driver license to be allowed to use the machine.
Hmm.
And many people did not have it, but so I was always asked, hey, can you measure? But yeah, then you see a lot of brains of people,
Hmm.
and one thing that, for example, is quite quite often means one in a few hundreds also, but is that the cerebellum is split a bit. I think it's that
Mm.
there is liquor or something as a child, and it pushes it a bit. There's really a split in it.
Hmm.
Um, but also we have where people seen where really brain parts were missing,
Okay. Okay, I
and
only
you
know it
have
from stories,
normal
but now you are part of the stories that I know.
And even one, I will not go into any details, or I actually don't know who that person was anymore, but I know that one person was a professor.
Oh.
So, and there was some parts really missing, and it really, but
What?
it does not mean that you are necessarily stupid. It's
Are you-
already good. Maybe
Okay.
it's also that the brain is overestimated, we don't need it.
And that's just a very interesting point, right? Yeah. So
Mm,
the, that person for sure was not particularly stupid. Yeah. Otherwise
mm.
they wouldn't have gotten that position. Yeah. Very interesting. Do
Imagine
you
how
still do
cool.
neuro stuff now in your research, or is it actually now all behavioral?
This is all behavioral, but it was already when I did my PhD and also before I was here, I did another postdoc for 2.5 years in Düsseldorf, and this was all behavioral. This is also with VR. I mean, you know the problem better
Mm.
than I do. It's tricky to combine it. Like it's almost impossible to do fMRI research with
Mm.
VR because you cannot
Yeah.
move. You cannot like no metal in it. I mean, EEG and others technology is easier, let's say, but I mean, you can probably explain way better than I how difficult and tricky it also is to combine these things.
Mm.
Um, so then for me, it was always behavioral research in the last years.
Mm-hmm.
But we have now, we just got a new member here in the lab, and he will be doing electrophysiology, EEG.
Super
So,
interesting. Yeah. I do have a sense that we could try and figure out some projects together where we are using, for example, this kind of idea of extra, like avatars with extra functionality that
mm,
we can't have without VR and without electrophysiological measurements. So that would be quite interesting to see what that does to the perception of oneself or to the perception of another person. Or also, I've recently had a very interesting point of an ethical perspective again. So if you are, for example, talking to or working with patients who have lost a limb
mm,
and you are restoring that limb in VR to, for example, do mirror therapy in VR, so
mm,
that their phantom pain is alleviated. And you also use a brain-computer interface, for example, to control aspects of that extra limb. And these people can then feel like they are more functional in VR than
mm,
they might be outside of VR. And and then the research project ends,
mm,
and then they're just going home, and that can be quite a jarring experience, I can imagine. So quite interesting problems that you run into. The In a weird way, the better the virtual reality is, the more of these problems you will encounter,
yeah.
right? So the more alluring, the more interesting or functional the virtual reality is, the more problematic it will be if it's taken away from the participants
Mm.
again.
Maybe an anecdote to that is from Jaron Laney. I don't know if you know him. He's also called the father of VR and is the reason why we call it virtual reality. And this is why
Really?
we, especially this association between head-mounted displays and virtual reality. So he was not the first one who came up with the term. It was some French author, I think, who talked about, I don't know what virtual reality in French is, but who used this word. But the context, like we use it now, was Jaron Lanier in the 80s who started VPL Research was the startup, was the first commercial VR startup ever.
Mm-hmm.
And this would have been a nice quiz, maybe. What would you guess was the name of their head-mounted display? It was the iPhone with
What?
I. The iPhone with I.
iPhone.
Yeah, like iPhone, like eyes.
Yeah,
So I think it's quite funny that it's exactly like the phone these days, but
yeah.
for eyes. But yeah, this was basically the first device. So, but what I wanted to say is, I can really recommend his book, Dawn of the New Everything. It's more an
Mm-hmm.
autobiographic book about his life,
Mm-hmm.
but of course a lot about VR. But he had really an interesting life and everything. But what he wrote in this book about VR and about this imperfection of VR, where he said, actually, this is something really positive that VR is so boring and just the result of limited human imagination or
Mm-hmm.
something, he said, because it for the first time gives us something to compare to reality. We don't never had another reality that we could experience in this way without VR.
Mm-hmm.
So we could never compare it to reality. And what he says is then leaving VR, taking off the headset and
Mm-hmm.
experiencing this rich world, this rich reality again, makes you appreciate reality more.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I noticed that with color and lighting and reflections. It's very
Hmm.
interesting. I had that. I never really like noticed it or appreciated it, when I started to develop virtual reality experiences myself, I noticed how difficult it is to do that well and to do lighting well and all these kind of nice visual effects. And in reality, you always have them,
Mm.
and everything is sharp. Everything is
Yeah.
nice. It's so difficult to
Uh,
reproduce it. Yeah.
Light is really important
Mm.
topic. It's also, I think, the biggest weakness of most of the VR research. So they often have nice assets, nice textures, but
Mm-hmm.
then they just drop a point light in the middle of the
Mm-hmm.
level, and the light does not look any good. But light is really difficult because you need to bake it. It's performance intense. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
just create it in real time. You need to render it, and then basically you just paint the surfaces brighter or darker later during the game. But preparing the assets for that is quite a pain.
Mm.
You need to go into the modeling software and prepare maps for that and so on. Um, I did this a lot and worked on lighting and optimizing lighting a lot
Mm-hmm.
for this research where I wanted to compare real world task performance with virtual task performance.
Mm-hmm.
Because this involved me, I can share my screen. Um, this involved not just or actually just some pictures if I want to show something, but it does just involve the task, but also the environment. So here on the left is a real world environment in which the task was done on this computer screen,
Mm-hmm.
and this was the virtual replication. And this was basically my project to learn 3D rendering. This was the idea for this project was there from the moment where I knew I will do something with VR. But it was the last project in the end that I collected. Was two and a half, almost 2.5 years or so later that I finally collected data for the study. So it was my playground to always think, here the detail, there the detail. There are some details in there. No one ever saw them in
Mm-hmm.
the experiment,
Mm-hmm.
but I know them. They are there. But it was always just the same room and getting it closer and closer. And
Mm-hmm.
especially the light was really the hardest here.
That is really indistinguishable. Very, very cool. Yeah, I can
Thanks.
imagine.
And by the way, this was also then. Since it was not just visually but also in scale the same, I
Uh huh.
rendered the room, the virtual room, blended onto the real room, so this was all there. You could touch it, you could
Yeah,
smell
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Was maybe not, I don't think it was something super important for the study. It didn't make it worse. This is
yeah.
something I'm pretty convinced, but I don't think that it was important really. But yeah, the room was at some point there at this level, and the details, it was everything accurate enough. So why not doing it? It definitely increases the immersion. So immersion describes basically the fidelity, so to say, of the
Mm.
VR experience. Or my boss Mess later describes it as the sum of sensory motor contingencies supported by a VR system. And what sounds super complicated is actually quite easy. It just means the actions you can perform to either perceive the world, like looking around, rotating your head when a VR system provides that. This is the sensomotor contingency supported by it, or actions you can do to change the world, like picking up an object and putting it somewhere else. Um, and the more interaction options a VR system provides, or the more interactions you can do, the more immersive it is. And this is here, of course, there was haptic feedback and everything, so it was more immersive. If this then changed the result, something I never tested, but I like this setup. Um,
Interesting.
but
With the this point of immersion, I'm always a little bit confused because I thought you can also be immersed in a book.
mm,
So, but that I thought that's the distinction is immersion and presence in VR. That VR is like it is producing immersion, but it is producing immersion by producing presence, and the
uh,
presence is the feeling of being there, right?
Yeah, this depends a lot on what kind of definition you look
Mm.
at. Immersion is a term that has, I wanted to give a short overview of my dissertation about the term.
Mm-hmm.
I did this for present. I wanted to do this also in the same way for immersion, but there are so many key different definitions of
Yeah.
immersion. And often immersion is really there's this getting soaked in from some story. You read a book and you really forget about the real world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but in VR, it's often also called technological immersion. Then it's really
Ah, yeah.
easily
That makes
best
sense.
summarized by the fidelity. So
Yeah.
higher
Yeah.
resolution, better tracking system, more interaction options. This
Mm-hmm.
increases the immersion and the psychological experience that is fostered or improved, increased by immersion, or can be increased. It does not have to. It cannot be also opposite, but usually more immersion is better. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say. Then the experience is psychological aspect. This is presence then. So this feeling of being there, or and that feeling of that what you experience is really happening. Um, but immersion does not always increase it. I had this have experience myself. From VR games that it's always when you have artificial locomotion, smooth locomotion, then you need to somehow define what is forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and usually it's just the direction where you look.
Yeah.
So you always walk
Head
where you look. But
oriented.
in
Yeah.
reality, I can walk in one direction, but look to the left, look to the
Yeah.
right. In VR, it means you always walk like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Another option is to use the hand, so just the controller rotation, which is, in my opinion, I mean, I think in shooter games it's quite often used. I never liked it.
I actually
Because,
started with that because of exactly
okay.
that problem that I got sick because the
Mm,
my walking orientation changed with my head orientation, and I couldn't do it. Yeah.
yeah. As for me, I never got sick if just found it annoying in this for
Mm.
this walking. But for because both options are not really good. Either you lose one hand, so to say,
Mm.
or you cannot look everywhere it's when you're walking. For this reason, I backed this Deca move.
Yeah, I have it
When the
too.
Deca Gear,
Yeah.
the headset was never delivered, but they delivered this Deca move is a small
Yeah.
clip, also an IMU, inertial measurement unit, so just rotation and
Magnetometer.
acceleration. But this can be used then to measure the hip rotation during the game, and then it's just the direction where your hip facing is where you're walking. And this is definitely increasing the immersion. It makes I can interact more like in the real world than with VR because I can, for example, walk straight and look to the left and the right. But I got this device after I had already quite a few years of VR experience
Mm-hmm.
and being used to snap turn and smooth locomotion with walking where you look and then
Mm-hmm.
when you for example you have a hallway I had this in Half-Life Alex. It was for a while my go-to when I had a new headset or something, same game, look how is it uh, experience better. But when you have like a hall that goes like left here and then to the right and then to left again, so you would walk like that in reality. But in VR what I did was I was standing like that, looked just to the right, made a snap turn, and
Mm-hmm.
then the other side. So in other words, my body did not rotate. It was
Mm-hmm.
just my head because my body don't have to. And suddenly I had to rotate my full body, and
Mm-hmm.
this kind of strategies didn't work in the
Mm-hmm.
same way anymore. And when you really rotate your body all the time, then a cable is also more bothering. I
Yeah.
was never as much bothered by the cable of my index than with the Deca move.
Mm. I think my
Um,
biggest problem with the Deca move was that it sometimes I always had to recalibrate it because in games where you kind of lost a few frames every now and then when because the graphics were too demanding, it kind of also lost its calibration. Then you had to recalibrate it. And since I was playing Skyrim with heavily modded
mm,
setup, it was basically unusable. And also you had to constantly like for every game you had to create the profile, the controller profile, and then if you don't use the Deca move, then you can't move at all. And after a while, it was just too tedious, and I just like removed
exactly,
it
this was also
completely.
my problem. It was on the one side, in the first, what I just described, that it decreased the experience for me is probably something to get used to.
Yeah,
I was just used to something else, but it was too tedious and everything, and didn't really add enough for me to use it more. I
yeah,
still have it somewhere, but I haven't used it in ages.
yeah, yeah. Same, exactly. It's laying
Mm,
in my in my
like so
VR.
many other
Yeah,
things.
yeah. That was super super interesting.
It
I'm
was
not sure what topics we have forgotten to touch yet. Do you have anything that you still wanted to tell us or the audience?
nothing the way I think it's this or that detail. I mean, I could talk about VR longer. This wouldn't be a problem. But nothing where I think this is something we definitely need to talk about. Or
Yeah.
no, I don't think so.
Then
If someone have questions, maybe people have questions or something.
yeah, that was I wanted to
Mm,
ask that right to the audience. If there are any questions, now is the time because we are approaching the end, but we're not quite there yet. But now you still have time to ask questions if you have any. And I have one last question, which I
okay.
think can also be quite a long one for you, which is what do you look forward to the most in using virtual reality? Let's say this decade and the next decade. And what are
Uh,
you also scared of the most?
uh, you want? What do you exactly mean with want to use them or expect
What do you
them?
look forward to? So
Mm.
what do you think is a positive thing that yeah what
So more of on the software side, on the use side, not on the technology side. I mean, I
both
would look, for example, look forward to have
both
contact lenses instead of headsets,
yeah
or something similar that is lightweight and where you can where you do not perceive the device itself. This is a big problem right
mm-hmm.
now that you're constantly, and especially for longer durations, more and more with every minute you feel the headset.
Yeah.
Um, otherwise, it's really hard. I'm looking forward to new Valve games, like we all do.
It's coming from very science fiction tech with contact lenses to a very straightforward thing that we are all waiting for the next Valve game at the moment,
Exactly.
and the next
Um,
Valve headset,
yeah,
I suppose.
and maybe then that VR, I mean, VR needs to get better still, so it's all the user experience and so on gets better. Although there is did a lot happen in the last years with
Mm.
standardizing stuff and so on. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward that more people use it because this is right now one of the things that makes VR also unattractive. Like VR has so much potential for social interactions. Like
Mm.
I'm right now living in Spain. My family, my friends mostly live in Germany. I mean, I have some friends now here as well. But I lived until February this year in Germany for all of my life and being able to just hanging out with friends in big screen watching a movie is in VR something different than having a game night on Zoom, for
Mm.
example. Nothing against game nights on Zoom, it's super fun, but having this really was a good VR experience. But here also the technology would need to get better. Like I don't watch movies in VR. I would like to watch on a huge screen, but with a bulky headset, it's uncomfortable. Then often it's certain poses like you cannot lean on the side or
Mm.
something. So it's here. I think yeah, more usage and more usability of the headsets
Mm.
is something that I'm looking forward to. Uh,
And what do you think
uh,
VR will be like in 10 years?
I think not so much different from now on. It will be better and hopefully also more widely used. Maybe there are also more things that people really do on a daily basis outside of entertainment and maybe sports, which is right now. I think that maybe some things like training also more is in VR. I think there's huge potential to training in VR. But otherwise, when you look into the last 55 years, so the first basically virtual reality headset was built in 1968 by Ivan Sutherland, so-called Sword of Damocles. It was a heavy device. It was suspended from with an arm from the ceiling because it was too heavy. But they used this arm that was movable to track the position. So it had computer graphics. It was of course not on the same level as today, but computer graphics and tracking. So the same components we use still for VR headsets. And I think this will not completely change. I mean, hopefully people like you will bring some new aspects how we can interact with VR. Um, but otherwise, yeah, have more sensors integrated and so on. But I think this is also something where we can go over to what is my biggest fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is really privacy.
Mm-hmm.
This is really, I mean, why I'm so interested in doing neuroscience. I mean, right now it's focused more on VR, less neuroscience actually, but I come and I want to at some point also to go back more to neuroscience with virtual reality. Why I'm so interested in it? Because I have a device which, first of all, gives super stimulus options, but VR system is not just a stimulus device; it's a measurement device. We talked about there's motion tracking, eye tracking, uh, electrophysiological electrophysiological data can or measurement can be combined with it, and so on. This is all something and in the future, we will measure more physiological, more behavioral data and better than we do right now. And it's right now already that this is a rich privacy issue. There was a few days ago a paper published by Meta where they have shown that when you are in Meta Horizon in a meeting and you type on a keyboard and the finger tracking is on, they can tell it was depending on the person between 80% and 98% what you have typed. So uh, they know what you're typing on your keyboard. And this was a real-world keyboard. They did not type anything in VR. It was just they saw how the fingers moved, and they used an AI to decode it, and they could guess passwords and etc. And when you then think with eye tracking and everything, we know all the time where is
Mm-hmm.
someone looking. We know exactly how does someone capture the attention. This is something we did for years in the lab with eye tracking, with super expensive, also 20,000 euro eye tracking devices.
Yeah.
To study attention to look where are they looking and now this is for a few hundred euros you can have this in a headset and companies like Meta can grab the data and do whatever they want with it and they can read out us in a completely different way than they could without.
Yeah.
And I think this is the biggest problem of VR. I mean, this is always a problem with new technology. It's also one of the biggest problems of the internet itself. Um,
Yeah. True.
I mean, without the internet, VR
Anything we're
wouldn't be a
doing
problem
online.
because no one could fetch the data from outside. But yeah, but with VR, you get just a different quality of data that we didn't have before, and it makes us much more readable. And we really need to look how to get privacy into virtual reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is. I fully agree. Yeah. This is a big topic, and it will become more and more relevant the more widespread virtual reality is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I should have inverted the question. First the fears and then the things you look forward to. I would like to end not on a negative note because
Ah, okay.
I am enthusiastic about VR and I do see the problems with it obviously as well. Um, but uh, but coming back to this feeling of connection, it's really an interesting device there. Yeah. For example,
Mm,
we played Demeo the other day or week where my mom has a Quest actually,
mm,
and my brother has an Acer Windows Mixed Reality, and we were playing Demeo, and it's really nice. It's really feels like a family game night, even though we are several 100,000 kilometers apart, and that is a fantastic effect that you can't reproduce. It's also hard to describe it. It really feels like you
Absolutely.
can physically show on things on the board, like point on stuff, and that's
Mm.
really something very cool.
Yeah, also this feeling when someone is in VR sitting next to you, you really
Yeah,
have the feeling there is someone sitting next to you. It's completely different than like we right now, we are separated. You feel
yeah,
far away, so to say.
yeah,
Although you're on the screen, but if you would sit in VR chat or something, then it would feel way more that you're really there.
yeah.
Um, I just wanted to say something else. I forgot about it. I'm getting tired.
Well, it's 6 p.m.
Yeah. Uh,
We've been talking for 2 hours now. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, it's super
I was
interesting topics. All of it.
when I thought of the previous podcast, I was a bit afraid. Wow, they talked almost 2 hours in both podcasts. I do have so much to talk.
Yeah.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah, apparently yes. Yeah, and also very interesting and very nice that also the
Thanks.
audience is sticking along. Yeah, so we've had almost consistently about 10 viewers.
Ooh.
Um, so so I mean, 10 viewers isn't crazy. It's not
Mm,
for an academic audience. It's kind of like what you would expect essentially, but it's more than we had in the beginning, and that's I think a nice feedback also for you. That the research that you're doing is super interesting and also
definitely.
important.
And thank you for everyone listening. That was really great. But for you also, third time or how many podcasts did you do already?
I've
I just
had
have seen two at least.
two guests, and I have done my own streams every now
Ah,
and
yeah,
then. Yeah,
right. It was one with
yeah,
your group or something, right?
yeah, exactly. And we were
Yeah.
also
So
with.
and then then I think 10 is a good number, right?
Yeah, 10 is a good number. Yeah. I mean,
This is
this. I will continue with this, and it will only grow. I've also recently had the thought that I could do something like online paper reading sessions, which is probably like the nerdiest thing that you can possibly imagine. But maybe people are interested in that, like how I'm reading papers and how I'm just like skimming through papers. And also maybe they can send me their own papers and I can roast them
mm,
because every paper has flaws.
I really like the idea. I would be in definitely for something like that. I thought already some time ago, I was really thinking trying to start a big screen journal club.
Mm-hmm.
So big screen you could see, everyone
Mm-hmm.
could read the paper because you have the screen in front of you, so this would work and then to discuss paper there. But I was in the end too afraid that no one would show up in the end, or just the strange people would show up like always.
Yeah, this organizational effort is really still like it's very very in the end it's really difficult to keep it up these things because it takes time. Also, this like this Twitch stream, obviously, talking 2 hours, I could have continued paper writing or data analysis or whatever, but I think it's important. It's super interesting. Um,
Mm.
Obviously, it's interesting, and I'm very grateful for your time and also for the time of previous and upcoming guests. But it also is effort, and you really have to want it to
Yeah,
keep these things
definitely.
up. Yeah.
I mean, this is already with so many things. Like you have also experience on Reddit with moderating and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. It always appears to be not much work, and someone does it for their hobby, but in the end, it's much work.
Mm-hmm.
You might enjoy it, but still, you invest a lot of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important to have these kind of things. First of all, to have some communication with the outside world, with normal people, not scientists. Um, and also to maybe get to know each other a bit better, like to learn more about what do other people do and so on. So in this sense, I'm grateful that you do something like that. I wouldn't be good, I think, as a host of something like this.
Well, I'm learning it myself, I suppose.
Yeah, but you're doing this good, definitely better than I would do. I would interrupt people too often, or I don't know, probably talking more than the guest in the end.
I think this is something that I'm actively working on, in fact.
Yeah, but
So
I mean,
yeah,
this worked well today at least, definitely.
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, so one person in the audience is asking when do we get to the gaming part since it's Twitch and not a podcast. Um, enable eye tracking if you're reading that. I don't have eye tracking on my notebook. I'm sorry. And I'm happy that you came here from Perry. We have one viewer here who was referred to from Perry Carriel. She's a Twitch streamer who uses the emotive epoch to play games, and was also the first guest of this series. Really cool projects that she's doing there. I'm afraid there will not be any games today. Sorry.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I
This
could
is
now go and start gaming. You could watch me how I play a game.
Yeah. In fact, there will be games today, but not online because I will play Baldur's Gate with friends and family today, and
Ooh,
I'm really
what will
looking
be a long
forward to
night.
that. Yeah. We've
Did you already played or the first time today?
Yeah, no, we've already played. We're in the Underdark at the moment,
Mm.
about like, I don't know, 100 hours in or something like that. And
Oh, well, it's
I
already
didn't
a
have the
bit.
time to play for a few weeks, and I finally have now again. And I'm really looking forward to
I
it.
didn't started to play it because I'm afraid that I get too much hooked and invest too much time, or that I want to play and I can't play then.
Yeah, I
It's,
actually bought a Steam Deck just for it because now I can play in the train on travel traveling in the train. I can play it then.
so you're commuting right now.
I am commuting, but actually during the commutes normally I work. But sometimes if the workday gets very long and I like go back home at like and I arrive home at 10 or something, then I normally don't work in these evenings then anymore. Or
Mm.
also if I'm somewhere like in a longer travel, like for giving a talk or something like that, then I can just take the Steam Deck with me and play in the train.
This is a good strategy. For me, I was also commuting between Cologne and Düsseldorf, and it was always a
Mm.
bit the opposite. In the morning, I was just listening to music, closing the eyes,
Hmm.
and waking up on the way until I'm in the office. But on the way back home, it was often ideas, and then it
Hmm.
was a lot of reading, paper reading, looking. I need to find something about this, about that. And I already had some good ideas on trains.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing this train riding, but we are digressing a lot at the moment.
Say what?
We are digressing a lot from the topic.
Yeah, that's true.
Before we completely lose any kind of focus, I would call it a day. I very much enjoyed this speaking to you today and the research
I
that you're
also
doing. It's
I
super
also enjoyed it,
interesting.
and thanks for inviting me. It was a
Yeah,
nice experience.
I'm glad that you had the time and you were willing to spend it as well. And I'm glad for all the audience who was here and asked questions and just attended. And that was a really, really nice evening. I look forward to the next one. I don't know who's the guest yet. It could be that next week I will do my paper reading thing.
Hmm.
Or I will. I'm currently figuring out a few things, but yeah, this, as I said, it all takes a little bit more time.
Yeah,
And
and
planning
yeah,
ahead is
I
difficult.
think it's also something never rush things. Either wait a bit longer until the next podcast is, but then have
Yeah,
something more interesting also.
yeah. At some point, I would like to establish a really regular session, like every, I don't know,
Hmm.
every Thursday on 5 p.m. or something like that. So that also the viewers know what to expect, because currently I'm switching days all the time, but life
Hmm.
is so chaotic. I'm happy that I can even manage being online, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Anyways,
yeah, then I don't want to steal more of your time.
no, I'm happy, as I said,
Yeah.
that you were there, and I mean you probably you're still in the lab, so you need to get home and get some dinner probably.
Yes, I'm quite hungry already.
I can imagine. Okay. Okay,
Fortunately,
then.
the microphone does not translate my stomach, but it makes noise all the time. Give me food.
I'm hungry. Yeah. I can imagine.
Okay, but yeah. Thanks for inviting me. It was great. It was fun, and I'm looking forward to listen to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know how to support the channel and how to find it on the Discord and everyone else. I'm always looking also for questions and interesting ideas to talk about in this podcast or talk series, chat series. So if you have anything, any idea that you want to share with me, just drop me a line on Discord, on the Discord channel that you see also here in the link right there. and yeah, with that being said, I wish you a great weekend. You,
Yeah, you
Michael,
too.
again, thank you for your time. Have a great weekend, and also you, the viewers, have a great weekend. And I look forward to the next evening.
Okay, I do the same, and thank you for inviting me, and also the audience for listening. And yeah, maybe say hello to Laura.
I will.
Yeah. Okay, then. Yeah, have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Bye.